Welcome to lesson 3 in chapter 3. Today we are going to discuss adding and subtracting decimals. Now, the first thing that you need to know is that you already know what you need to know. The reality is you already know most of what you need to know about adding and subtracting decimals because the bulk of it is just adding and subtracting. The only thing that I'm going to teach you, assuming you don't already know it, is what to actually do with the decimal point. Now, the reality is we like to do vertical addition and subtraction because vertical addition and subtraction lines our places up nicely. So we're going to continue doing vertical addition and subtraction. We are just going to make sure that we line our places up at the decimal point. Now, should you find yourself in a situation where there is any number that does not have a digit in a particular place, just fill it in with a 0, whether it's a leading or a trailing 0 will not matter, just to make everything line up nicely. Now, if you do this, the likelihood of you making a mistake is next to nothing. Now, there's always a possibility that you can get trailing zeros in your answers, and we tend to just throw those away. We're not going to write 5.0 and we could just write 5. The exception to that rule is, of course, money, because we do want to show money to 2 decimal places. That is the nearest hundredth. So let's start with some basics. Okay, take a second, write the word problem down. But the basic premise here is, of course, that somebody's just basically saying, hey, I want to see how much I earned so far. And of course, when you have a part-time job, your pay could vary greatly depending on how many hours you work. So that's why they're seeing so much variation in the paycheck there. So, okay. First thing we're going to do is we're going to set up for vertical addition. I know you don't normally add several numbers together, but that's okay because adding 2 numbers, 3 numbers, 4 numbers, it's all the same thing. So we're going to line everything up and add it. It does not have to be in any particular order. I just wrote it down in the order that it appeared in the problem. And we are going to perform vertical addition starting at the rightmost column. Now, as far as the decimal point is concerned, there are 2 approaches. One approach is, since everything is lined up, the very first thing you do is write the decimal point down. And that would be true for both addition and subtraction. The other approach is just mark the decimal point when you get to it, which is how we'll deal with the next problem. So let's look at that first column and let's just add everything up. So we're going to add up, what do we have? 5 plus 6 plus 9 plus 0. That's a lot. So when we add all that up, we actually get 20. So we're going to write down the 0, and of course we're going to carry over the 2. And then we're going to add up 2 plus 1 plus 7 plus 3 plus 4. And what does that add up to? 2 plus 1, 10. So we're looking at 17. So we're going to write down the 7. We're going to carry the 1. So 1 plus 8 plus 2 plus 4 plus 1. I think that gives us 16. So we're going to write down the 6. We're going to carry the 1. 1 plus 4 plus 9 plus 5 plus 2. Now there's no places left to carry, so we're just going to write down the 21. And that's it. We've added our decimal. And it turns out that he makes 216.70. Now, let's take a somewhat different approach. Something that you are going to learn, it's a hard lesson for all of us to learn, is that what you get paid is not actually what you get paid, thanks to the wonderful world of taxes. So somebody is looking at their paycheck and they're basically saying, well, my gross pay, that's before taxes are taken out, by the way, was $245.62, but they took out $66.37 in taxes. Now, mistakes do get made. Somebody's going to say, well, I'm just going to look at how much they paid me. There's always a possibility that a mistake was made and that subtraction was done wrong or something like that. So it's always worth actually taking a quick look and making sure the numbers are correct, but the odds are they're probably correct. So in this case, we are talking about subtraction. Subtraction, of course, requires us to borrow when necessary. So what I'm going to do is, instead of writing the decimal point down in the first place, I'm just going to wait till I get to it. So 2 minus 7, I can't do 2 minus 7. Okay, so I'm going to borrow from the 6, so the 6 becomes a 5, and the 2 becomes a 12. 12 minus 7 I can do, that's 5. Next, I'm going to do 5 minus 3, no borrowing necessary. 5 minus 3 is 2. I got to my decimal point, so I'm going to put it down. Next, I'm going to do 5 minus 6. I can't do that, so I'm going to have to borrow from the 4. The 4 becomes a 3. The 5 becomes a 15. 15 minus 6 is 9. 3 minus 6 I can't do, so I'm going to have to borrow from the 2. The 2 becomes a 1. The 3 becomes a 13. 13 minus 6 is 7. And the last thing I do, there's nothing left to subtract in the hundreds place, so I just bring down the 1, and she got 176.25. Okay? So that's it. Very straightforward. Work vertically, line up at the decimal point. Obviously, time for you to do some practice. Take a second, pause, write the problems down. I'm just going to go through and do the answers column by column. And that's pretty much what we do in class all the time anyway. Okay, so I'm assuming you paused it, you wrote it down. Let's go through and answer the questions. Now remember, this is just practice. I gave you the 2 examples prior where I talked about how to set things up, and you know how to add and subtract. All we did is throw a decimal point in there. Now keep in mind for the first one there, if I got the answer 10, it's probably because the answer came out to 10.0 and I'm just not writing the trailing 0. Now if I did write it, if I wrote 10.0 or 2.0 or 11.0, would it be wrong? Absolutely not. It would not be wrong. There's nothing wrong with putting that decimal point and that 0 there. It's just not required. That's all. So obviously we're going to have to do a little bit of algebra, so we're going to do some algebraic substitution. So they give us an expression and they give us values to substitute in for the expression. So I'm going to remind you the way this works is you write down the expression, you substitute in for the variable using parentheses, and then you do the math. And since they give us 4 different values, we will write down the expression, substitute in for the variable, and do the math 4 times. So expression, substitute, do the math. Expression, plug in, do the math. Very straightforward, still just addition. And just for a little bit of extra practice, let's do it once for subtraction. Same basic concept, write down the expression, plug in, do the math. Yes, I know they're the same numbers, I'm lazy. All right, write down the expression, plug in, do the math. Does not change. Write down the expression, plug in, do the math. Write down the expression, plug in, do the math. Now listen, are you subtracting 67.29 minus 42.83 in your head? Of course you're not, all right? Most of us aren't doing that. I'm not doing that, all right? So yes, we go off to the side, we write down our vertical subtraction, we make sure everything's lined up, and we do our subtraction just like we've been doing it for years. There is no difference, just like that first subtraction problem. Very straightforward section, very little to talk about. All right, homework, a little bit more this time, but it's just a bunch of addition and subtraction. And you know how to add and subtract. The only thing we did is we threw some decimals in there. Remember, this is the end of what we're going to be covering before our first test in Chapter 3. So the next section, Section 3.4, which is about multiplication, is going to be on the second test in Chapter 3. So this is the end of the material. After this, we are going to be doing test prep, and we are going to be getting ready for our first test, which will be very short because we do have 3 relatively short sections. Of course, we will address any questions that anyone has in class.